Alright, I think I've got just enough time here before my union meeting. Here we go. A spell for Chameleon, Chapter 14, Wiggle. The three of them walked out of Castle Roogna without challenge. The portcullis was raised. Trent had found the hoisting winch, oiled it, and cranked it up with the aid of the magic inherent in its mechanism. The ghosts appeared to bid them all fond adieu. Chameleon cried at this parting, and even Bink felt sad. He knew how lonely it would be for the ghosts after these few days of living company, and he even respected the indomitable castle itself. It did what it had to do, much as Bink himself did. They carried bags of fruits from the garden and wore functional clothing from the castle closets, stored for 800 years without deterioration by means of the potent ancient spells. They looked like royalty, and felt like it too. Castle Roogna had taken good care of them. The gardens were magnificent. No storm erupted this time. No trees made threatening gestures. Indeed, they moved their limbs to be touched gently in the gesture of parting friendship. No vicious animals appeared, and no zombies. In a surprisingly short time, the castle was out of sight. "We are now beyond Roogna's environs," Trent announced. "We must resume full alertness, for there is no truce with the true wilderness." "We?" Bink asked. "Aren't you going back to the castle?" "Not at this time," the magician said. Bink's suspicion was renewed. "Just exactly what did you say to that castle?" "I said, I shall return. As king, Roogna shall rule Xanth again." "And it believed that?" Trent's gaze was tranquil. Why should it doubt the truth? I could hardly win the crown while remaining confined in the wilderness. Bink did not respond. The evil magician had never said he'd given up his plot to conquer Xanth after all. He had merely agreed to see Bink and Chameleon safely out of the castle. He had done this, so now they were back where they had been, operating under a truce to get them all safely out of the remainder of the wilderness. After that, Bink's mind was blank. The untamed forest did not take long to make its presence felt. The trio cut through a small glade girt with pretty yellow flowers, and a swarm of bees rose up. Angrily they buzzed the three, not actually touching or stinging, but shearing off abruptly at short range. Chameleon sneezed, and sneezed again, violently. Then Bink sneezed too, and so did Trent. "Sneeze bees!" the magician exclaimed between paroxysms. "Transform them!" Bink cried. "I can't focus on them. My eyes are watering. Anyway, they're innocent creatures of the... Ah!" "Run, you dopes!" Chameleon cried. They ran. As they cleared the glade, the bees left off and the sneezes stopped. "Good thing they weren't choke bees," the magician said, wiping his flowing eyes. Bink agreed. A sneeze or two was okay, but a dozen piled on top of one another was a serious matter. There had hardly been time to breathe. Their noise had alerted others in the jungle. That was always the background threat here. There was a bellow and the sound of big paws striking the ground. All too soon, a huge fire-snorting dragon hove into view. It charged right through the sneeze glade, but the bees left it strictly alone. They knew better than to provoke any fire sneezes that would burn up their flowers. "Change it! Change it!" Chameleon cried as the dragon oriented on her. Dragons seemed to have a special taste for the fairest maidens. "Can't," Trent muttered. "By the time it gets within 6 feet, its fire will have scorched us all into roasts. It's got a 20-foot blowtorch." "You aren't much help," she complained. "Transform me!" Bink cried with sudden inspiration. Good idea. Abruptly, Bink was a sphinx. He retained his own head, but he had the body of a bull, wings of an eagle, and legs of a lion. And he was huge. He towered over the dragon. "I had no idea sphinxes grew this big," he boomed. "Sorry, I forgot again," Trent said. "I was thinking of the legendary sphinx in Mundania." "But the mundanes don't have magic." "This one must have wandered out from Xanth a long time ago. For thousands of years it has been stone, petrified." "Petrified? What could scare a sphinx that size?" Chameleon wondered, peering up at Bink's monstrous face. But there was business to attend to. "Be gone, beastie!" Bink thundered. The dragon was slow to adapt to the situation. It shot a jet of orange flame at Bink, scorching his feathers. The blast didn't hurt, but it was annoying. Bink reached out with one lion's paw and swiped at the dragon. It was a mere ripple of effort, but the creature was thrown sideways into a tree. A shower of rock nuts dropped on it from the angry tree. The dragon gave a single yelp of pain, doused its fire, and fled. Bink circled around carefully, hoping he hadn't stepped on anyone. "Why didn't we think of this before?" he bellowed. "I can give you a ride right to the edge of the jungle. No one will recognize us, and no creature will bother us." He squatted as low as possible, and Chameleon and Trent climbed up his tail to his back. Bink moved forward with a slow stride that was nevertheless faster than any man could run. They were on their way. But not for long. Chameleon, bouncing around on the Sphinx's horny-skinned back, decided she had to go to the bathroom. There was nothing to do but let her go. Bink hunched down so she could slide safely to the ground. Trent took advantage of the break to stretch his legs. He walked around to Bink's huge face. "I'd transform you back, but it's really better to stick with the form until finished with it," he said. "I really have no concrete evidence that frequent transformations are harmful to the recipient, but it seems best not to gamble at this time. Since the Sphinx is an intelligent life form, you aren't suffering intellectually." "No, I'm okay," Bink agreed. "Better than ever, in fact. Can you guess this riddle? What walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 in the evening?" "I shall not answer," Trent said, looking startled. "In all the legends I've heard, some Sphinxes committed suicide when the correct answers to their riddles were given. Those were the smaller type of Sphinx, a different species, but I seem to have muddled the distinctions somewhat and would not care to gamble on the absence of affinity." No," Bink said, chagrined. "I guess the riddle was from the mind of the Sphinx, not me. I'm sure all Sphinxes had a common ancestor, though I don't know the difference between one kind and another." "Odd. Not about your ignorance of mundane legends, about your riddle memory. You are the Sphinx. I didn't move your mind into an existing body, for the original creatures have all been dead or petrified for millennia. I transformed you into a similar monster, a Bink Sphinx. But if you actually have Sphinx memories, true Sphinx memories, there must be ramifications of your magic you don't comprehend," Bink said. "I wish I understood the real nature of magic, any magic." "Yes, it is a mystery. Magic exists in Xanth, nowhere else. Why? What is its mechanism? Why does Xanth seem to be adjacent to any mundane land in geography, language, and culture? How is this magic in all its multiple levels transmitted from the geographic region to the inhabitants?" "I have pondered that," Bink said. "I thought perhaps some radiation from the rock or nutritional value of the soil. When I am king, I shall initiate a study program to determine the true story of Xanth's uniqueness." When Trent was king. The project was certainly worthwhile, in fact fascinating, but not at that price. For a moment, Bink was tempted. With the merest swipe of his mighty forepaw, he could squash the evil magician flat, ending the threat forever. No, even if Trent were not really his friend, Bink could not violate the truce that way. Besides, he didn't want to remain a monster all his life, physically or morally. "The lady is taking her sweet time," Trent muttered. Bink moved his ponderous head, searching for Chameleon. "She's usually very quick about that sort of thing. She doesn't like being alone." Then he thought of something else. Unless she went looking for her spell, to make her normal. She left Xanth in an effort to nullify her magic, and now that she's stuck back in Xanth, she wants some kind of counter-magic. She's not very bright right now, and... Trent stroked his chin. "This is the jungle. I don't want to violate her privacy, but... maybe we'd better check for her." Well, I guess you can stand one more transformation," Trent decided. "I'll make you a bloodhound. That's a mundane animal, a kind of dog, very good at sniffing out a trail. If you run into her doing something private, well, you'll only be an animal, not a human voyeur." Abruptly, Bink was a keen-nosed, floppy-eared, loose-faced creature, smell-oriented. He could pick up the lingering odor of anything, he was sure of that. He had never before realized how overwhelmingly important the sense of smell was. Strange that he had ever depended on any lesser sense. Trent concealed their supplies in a mock tangle tree and faced about. "Very well, Bink. Let's sniff her out." Bink understood him well enough, but could not reply, as this was not a speaking form of animal. Chameleon's trail was so obvious it was a wonder Trent himself couldn't smell it. Bink put his nose to the ground. How natural that the head be placed so close to the primary source of information instead of raised foolishly high as in Trent's case, and moved forward confidently. The route led around behind a bush and on into the wilderness. She had been lured away. In her present low ebb of intelligence, almost anything would fool her. Yet, there was no consistent odor of any animal or plant she might have followed. That suggested magic. Worried, Bink woofed and sniffed on, the magician following. A magic lure was almost certainly trouble. But her trace did not lead into a tangle tree or gucktooth swamp or the lair of a wyvern. It wove intricately between these obvious hazards, bearing generally south into the deepest jungle. Something obviously had led her, guiding her safely past all threats, but what and where and why? Bink knew the essence, if not the detail. Some will-o'-the-wisp spell had beckoned her, tempting her ever forward, always just a little out of reach. Perhaps it had seemed to offer some elixir, some enchantment to make her normal, and so she had followed. It would lead her into untracked wilderness where she would be lost, and leave her there. She would not survive long. Bink hesitated. He had not lost the trail. That could never happen. There was something else. "What is it, Bink?" Trent inquired. "I know she was following the Ignis Fatuus, but since we are close on her trail, we should be able to—" He broke off, becoming aware of the other thing. There was a shuddering in the ground, as of some massive object striking it, an object weighing many tons. Trent looked around. "I can't see it, Bink. Can you smell it?" Bink was silent. The wind was wrong. He could not smell whatever was making that sound from this distance. "Want me to transform you into something more powerful?" Trent asked. "I'm not sure I like this situation. First the swamp gas, now this strange pursuit." If Bink changed, he would no longer be able to sniff out Chameleon's trail. He remained silent. "Very well, Bink. But stay close by me. I can transform you into a creature to meet any emergency, but you have to be within range. I believe we're walking into extreme danger, or having it walk up on us." And he touched his sword. They moved on, but the shuddering grew bolder, becoming a measured thumping as of some ponderous animal, yet they saw nothing. Now it was directly behind them and gaining. "I think we'd better hide," Trent said grimly. "Discretion is said to be the better part of valor." "Good idea." They circled a harmless beer barrel tree and watched silently. The thumping became loud. Extremely loud. The whole tree shook with the force of the measured vibrations. Tramp, tramp, tramp. Small branches fell off the tree, and a leak sprang in the trunk. A thin jet of beer formed, splashing down under Bink's sensitive nose. He recoiled. Even in the human state, he had never been partial to that particular beverage. He peered around the trunk, yet there was nothing. Then at last, something became visible. A branch crashed off a spike-spire tree, splintering. Bushes waved violently aside. A section of earth subsided. More beer jetted from developing cracks in the trunk of their hiding place, filling the air with its malty fragrance. Still nothing tangible could be seen. "It's invisible," Trent whispered, wiping beer off one hand. "An invisible giant." Invisible! That meant Trent couldn't transform it. He had to see what he enchanted. Together, silently, steeped in intensifying beer fumes, they watched the giant pass. Monstrous human footprints appeared, each 10 feet long, sinking inches deep into the forest soil. Tramp! And the trees jumped and shuddered and shed their fruits and leaves and branches. Tramp! And an ice cream bush disappeared, becoming a mere patina of flavored discoloration on the flat surface of the depression. Tramp! And a tangled tree hugged its tentacles about itself, frightened. Tramp! And a fallen trunk splintered across the 5-foot width of the giant's print. A stench washed outward suffocatingly, like that of a stench puffer or an overflowing outhouse in the heat of summer. Bink's keen nose hurt. "I am not a cowardly man," Trent murmured, "but I begin to feel fear. When neither spell nor sword can touch an enemy." His nose twitched. His body odor alone is deadly. He must have feasted on rotten blivets for breakfast. Bink didn't recognize that food. If that was the kind of fruit mundane trees formed, he didn't want any. Bink became aware that his own hackles were erect. He had heard of such a monster but taken it as a joke, an invisible, but not unsmellable, giant. "If he is in proportion," Trent remarked, "that giant is some 60 feet tall. That would be impossible in Mundania for purely physical reasons, square cube law and such. But here, who can say nay to magic? He's looking over much of the forest, not through it." He paused, considering. He evidently was not following us. Where is he going? Wherever Chameleon went, Bink thought. He growled. "Right, Bink. We'd better track her down quickly before she gets stepped on." They moved on, following what was now a well-trodden trail. Where the huge prints crossed Chameleon's traces, the scent of the giant was overlaid, so heavy that Bink's refined nose rebelled. He skirted the prints and picked up Chameleon's much milder scent on the far side. Now, a whistling descended from right angles to the path they were following. Bink looked up nervously and saw a griffin angling carefully down between the trees. Trent whipped out his sword and backed toward the black bowl of an oil barrel tree, facing the monster. Bink, in no condition to fight it, bared his teeth and backed toward the same protection. He was glad it wasn't a dragon. One really good tongue of fire could set off the tree explosively and wipe them all out. As it was, the overhanging branches would interfere with the monster's flight, forcing it to do combat on the ground. Still a chancy business, but it restricted the battle zone to 2 dimensions, which was a net advantage for Bink and Trent. Maybe if Bink distracted it, Trent could get safely within range to transform it. The griffin settled to earth, folding its extensive glossy wings. Its coiled lion's tail twitched about, and its great front eagle's talons made streaks in the dirt. Its eagle head oriented on Trent. "Cop?" it inquired. Bink could almost feel that deadly beak slicing through his flesh. A really healthy griffin could take on a medium-sized dragon in single combat, and this one was healthy. He nudged within transformation range. "Follow the giant tracks that way," Trent said to the monster. "Can't miss it." "Bop," the griffin said. It turned about, oriented on the giant tracks, bunched its lion muscles, spread its wings, and launched itself into the air. It flew low-level along the channel the invisible giant had carved through the forest. Trent and Bink exchanged startled glances. They had had a narrow escape. Griffins were very agile in combat, and Trent's magic might not have taken effect in time. "It only wanted directions," Trent said. "Must be something very strange up ahead. We'd better get there in a hurry. Be unfortunate if some part-human cult was having a ritual sacrifice." "Ritual sacrifice?" Bink growled his confusion. "You know," Trent said grimly. "Bloody altar, beautiful verdant maiden." "Roar!" Bink took off down the trail. Soon they heard a commotion ahead. It was a medley of thumps, crashes, bellows, squawks, and crashes. "Sounds more like a battle than a party," Trent observed. "I really can't think what—" At last they came in sight of the happening. They paused, amazed. It was an astonishing assemblage of creatures ranged in a large, loose circle facing in. Dragons, griffins, manticoras, harpies, land serpents, trolls, goblins, fairies, and too many others to take in all at once. There were even a few human beings. It was not a free-for-all. All were intent on individual exercises, stamping their feet, biting at air, slamming their hooves together, and banging on rocks. In the interior of the circle, a number of creatures were dead or dying, ignored by the others. Bink could see and smell the blood, and hear their groans of agony. This was a battle, certainly, but where was the enemy? It was not the invisible giant. His prints were confined to one quadrant, not overlapping the territory of his neighbors. "I thought I knew something about magic," Trent said, shaking his head, "but this is beyond my comprehension. These creatures are natural enemies, yet they ignore one another and do not feed on prey. Have they happened on a cache of loco?" "Woof," Bink exclaimed. He had spied Chameleon. She had 2 large flat stones in her hands and was holding them about a foot apart while she stared intently between them. Suddenly she clapped them together with such force that they both fell out of her hands. She peered at the air above them, smiled enigmatically, picked them up, and repeated the procedure. Trent followed Bink's gaze. "Loco?" he repeated. But Bink could smell no loco. "Her too. It must be an area spell. We'd better back off before we also fall prey to it." They started to retreat, though Bink did not want to desert Chameleon. A grizzled old centaur cantered up. "Don't just meander around," he snapped. "Get around to the north quadrant." He pointed. "We've suffered heavy losses there, and Bigfoot can't do it all. He can't even see the enemy. They'll break through any minute. Get some rocks. Don't use your sword, fool." "Don't use my sword on what?" Trent demanded, with understandable ire. "The wiggles, naturally. Cut one in half, all you have is 2 wiggles. You—" "The wiggles," Trent breathed, and Bink growled his own chagrin. The centaur sniffed. "You been drinking?" "Bigfoot's passage holed the beer barrel tree we took refuge behind," Trent explained. "I thought the wiggles had been eradicated." "So did we all," the centaur said, "but there's a healthy colony swarming here. You have to crush them or chew them or burn them or drown them. We can't afford to let a single one escape. Now get moving." Trent looked about. "Where are the stones?" "Here. I've gathered a pile." The centaur showed the way. "I knew I couldn't handle it myself, so I sent out will-o'-the-wisps to summon help." Suddenly, Bink recognized the centaur. Herman the Hermit. Exiled from the centaur community for obscenity almost a decade ago. Amazing that he had survived here in the deepest wilderness, but centaurs were hardy folk. Trent did not make the connection. The episode had happened after his exile. But he well knew the horror the Wiggles represented. He picked up 2 good rocks from Herman's cache and strode toward the north quadrant. Bink followed. He had to help too. If even one wiggle got away, there would at some later date be another swarming, perhaps not stopped in time. He caught up to the magician. "Woof! Woof!" he barked urgently. Trent looked straight ahead. "Bink, if I transform you here and now, the others will see and know me for what I am. They may turn against me, and the siege against the Wiggles will be broken. I think we can contain the swarm with our present creature power. The Centaur has organized the effort well. Your natural form would not be better equipped to wage this war than your present form. Wait until this is over." Bink was not satisfied with all the arguments, but he seemed to have no choice. So he determined to make himself useful as he was. Maybe he could smell out the Wiggles. As they came up to their designated quadrant, a griffin gave a loud squawk and keeled over. It resembled the one they had directed here. It must have lost sight of its guiding will-o'-the-wisp. But all griffins looked and smelled pretty much alike to Bink. Not that it mattered objectively. All creatures here had a common purpose. Still, he felt a certain identification. He ran to it, hoping the injury was not critical. The creature was bleeding from a mortal wound. A wiggle had holed it through its lion's heart. Wiggles traveled by sudden rushes along wiggle-sized magic tunnels they created. Then they paused to recuperate, or perhaps merely to contemplate philosophical matters. No one really knew the rationale of a wiggle. Therefore, the killer wiggle that had gotten the griffin should be right about here. Bink sniffed and picked up its faint, putrid odor. He oriented on it and saw his first live wiggle. It was a 2-inch-long, loosely spiraled worm hovering absolutely still in midair. It hardly looked like the menace it was. He barked, pointing his nose at it. Trent heard him. He strode across with his 2 rocks. "Good job, Bink," he cried. He smashed the rocks together on the wiggle. As they came apart, the squished, dead hulk of the tiny monster dropped. One down. Zap! "There's another!" Trent cried. "They tunnel through anything, even air, so we hear the collapse of the vacuum behind them. This one should be right about... there!" He smashed his stones together again, crunching the wiggle. After that, it was hectic. The Wiggles were zapping determinedly outward, each in its own pattern. There was no way of telling how long they would freeze in place, seconds or minutes, or how far they would zap, inches or feet. But each Wiggle went in the precise direction it had started, never shifting even a fraction, so it was possible to trace that line and locate it fairly quickly. If someone stood in front of a Wiggle at the wrong time, he got zapped, and if the hole were through a vital organ, he died. But it was not feasible to stand behind a Wiggle, for the closer in toward the source of the swarm one went, the more the Wiggles were present. There were so many Wiggles that a creature smashing one could be simultaneously holed by another. It was necessary to stand at the outer fringe of expansion and nab the leaders first. The Wiggles really seemed to be mindless, or at least indifferent to external things. Their preset Wiggle courses hold anything at all, in the way. If a person didn't locate a Wiggle fast, it was too late, for the thing had zapped again. Yet it could be tricky to find a still Wiggle, for it looked like a twisted stem from the side and a coiled stem from the end. It had to move to attract attention to itself, and then it might be too late to nab it. "This is like standing in a firing range and catching the bullets as they pass," Trent muttered. That sounded like another mundane illusion. Evidently mundane Wiggles were called bullets. The invisible giant operated beside Bink on the right, as his nose plainly told him. Tramp! And a Wiggle was crushed out of existence. Maybe 100 Wiggles at once, but so was anything else that got underfoot. Bink didn't dare point out Wiggles for Bigfoot. It would be his own death warrant. For all he knew, the giant was stomping randomly. It was as good a way as any. On the left side, a unicorn operated. When it located a Wiggle, it either crushed it between horn and hoof, or closed its mouth over it and ground it to shreds with its equine teeth. This seemed to Bink to be a distasteful and hazardous mode of operation, because if it mistimed a Wiggle, zap! A hole appeared in the unicorn's jaw. Blood dripped out. The creature made a single neigh of anguish, then trotted along the path of the zap. It located the Wiggle and chomped down again, using the other side of its jaw. Bink admired the unicorn's courage, but he had to get on with his own job. 2 Wiggles had just zapped within range. He pointed out the nearest for Trent, then ran to the other, afraid Trent would not reach it in time. His hound's teeth were made for cutting and tearing, not chewing, but maybe they would do. He bit down on the Wiggle. It squished unpleasantly. Its body was firm, but not really hard, and the juices squirted out. The taste was absolutely awful. There was some sort of acid, but Bink chewed carefully several times to be sure of crushing it all. He knew that any unsquished fragment would zap it away as a tiny Wiggle, just as dangerous as the original. He spat out the remains. Surely his mouth would never be the same again. Zap, zap. 2 more wiggles nearby. Trent heard one and went after it. Bink sought out the other. But even as they both oriented, a third zap sounded between them. The pace was stepping up as the great internal mass of wiggles reached the perimeter. There were too many wiggles to keep up with. The complete swarm might number 1,000,000. There was a deafening bellow from above. Whoa! Herman the centaur galloped by. Blood trailed from a glancing wiggle wound in his flank. "Bigfoot's hit!" he cried. "Get out of the way!" "But the wiggles are breaking out," Trent said. "I know. We're taking heavy losses all around the perimeter. It's a bigger swarm than I thought, more dense in the center. We can't hold them anyway. We'll have to form a new containment circle and hope that more help arrives in time. Save yourselves before the giant falls." Good advice. A huge print appeared in Bink's territory as Bigfoot staggered. They got out of there. "Ow-gah!" the giant bawled. Hold on. Too many mystery noises in this house. Anyway. Let's see. Another print appeared, this time in toward the center of the circle. A wash of air passed as he fell, heavy laden with the giant aroma. Goo-ah! The sound arched down from a 50-foot elevation toward the center of the wiggle swarm. The crash was like that of a petrified pine felled by magic. Whoomp! Herman, who had taken refuge behind the same jelly barrel tree as Trent and Bink, wiped a squirt of jelly out of his eye and shook his head sadly. "There goes a big, big man. Little hope now of containing the menace. We're disorganized and short of personnel, and the strength of the enemy is sweeping outward. Only a hurricane could get them all, and the weather's dry." Then he looked again at Trent. "You seem familiar. Aren't you—" "Yes, 20 years ago." Trent raised his hand. "I regret the necessity," he began. "No, wait, magician," Herman said. "Transform me not. I will not betray your secret. I could have bashed your head in with my foot just now, had I intended you ill. Know you not why I was exiled from my kind?" Trent paused. "I know not, for I do not know you." "I am Herman the Hermit, punished for the obscenity of practicing magic. By summoning will-o'-the-wisps. No centaur is supposed to." "You mean centaurs can practice magic?" "They could, if they would. We centaurs have existed so long in Xanth we have become a natural species, but magic is considered obscene," Trent finished, voicing Bink's thought. "So magic-intelligent creatures could do magic. Their inability was cultural, not genetic." "So you became a hermit in the wilderness." "Correct. I share your humiliation of exile, but now we have a need more important than privacy. Use your talent to abolish the wiggle menace." "I can't transform all the wiggles. I must focus on one at a time, and there are too many—" "Not that. We must cauterize them." "I had hoped my wisps would lead in a salamander." "A salamander?" Trent exclaimed. "Of course." "But even so, the fire could not spread fast enough to burn out all the wiggles, and if it did, the fire itself would then be unstoppable, a greater menace than the wiggles. We'd merely exchange one devastation for another." "Not so. There are certain restrictions on salamanders, and with foresight they can be controlled. I was thinking of—" Zap! A hole appeared in the trunk of the tree. Jelly oozed out like purple blood. Bink dashed out to crunch the wiggle, who fortunately had passed between them and injured no one. "Ugh, that taste!" "They're inside the trees," Trent said. "Some are bound to land within things. Impossible to catch those." Herman trotted over to a nondescript bush. He yanked several vines from it. "Salamander weed," he explained. "I have become a fair naturalist in my years of isolation. This is the one thing a salamander can't burn. It represents a natural barrier to the fire. Eventually, the flames are stopped by proliferating weeds. If I make a harness of this, I can carry a salamander around in a great circle just beyond the infestation." "But how to stop the fire before it destroys most of Xanth?" Trent asked. "We can't wait on the chance of the weeds. Half of the wilderness could be ravaged before it burns itself out. We can't possibly clear a fire break in time." He paused. "You know, that must be why our wisps summoned no salamanders. This thick forest would naturally have a salamander repulsion spell to keep them away, because such a fire would quickly prejudice this whole environment. Still, if we start a fire—" Herman held up one strong hand in a halt gesture. He was an old centaur, but still strong. The arm was magnificently muscled. "You know how salamander burns only in the direction it starts? If we form a circle of inward-burning magic fire—" "Suddenly I comprehend," Trent exclaimed. "It will burn itself out at the center." He looked around. "Bink?" "What else?" Bink did not relish being a salamander, but anything was better than yielding Xanth to the wiggles. No person or creature would be safe if the swarms got out of control again. He came up. Suddenly, he was a small, bright amphibian, about 5 inches from nose to tail. Once more he remembered the omen he had seen back at the outset of his adventure. The chameleon lizard had also become a salamander, before being swallowed up by the mothhawk. Had his time finally come? The ground he stood on burst into flame. The underlying sand would not burn, but all the material on top of it was fuel. "Climb in here," Herman said, holding a pouch he had cleverly formed of vines. "I will carry you in a great left circle. Be sure you direct your fire inward, to the left." And to make quite sure Bink understood, he pointed with his left hand. Well, such a limit wouldn't be much fun, but... Bink climbed into the net. The centaur picked it up and dangled it at arm's length. As well he might, for Bink was hot. Only the frustrating salamander weed vines prevented him from really tearing loose. Herman galloped. "Clear out! Clear out!" he cried with amazing volume to the straggling wounded creatures still trying to stop the wiggles. "We're burning them out! Salamander!" And to Bink, "To the left! To the left!" Bink had hoped he'd forgotten about that restriction. Ah well, half a burn was better than none. From him, a sheet of flame erupted. Everything it touched burst up anew, burning savagely. Branches, leaves, whole green trees, even the carcasses of fallen monsters, the flame consumed all. That was the nature of salamander fire. It burned magically, heedless of other conditions. No rainstorm could put it out, for water itself would burn. Everything except rock and earth, and salamander weed. Curse the stuff! Now, a hasty exodus developed. Dragons, griffins, harpies, goblins, and men scrambled out of the path of the terrible fire. Every movable form cleared out, except the wiggles, which proceeded as mindlessly as ever. The flames spread hungrily up the great trees, consuming them with awesome rapidity. A tangle tree writhed in agony as it was incinerated, and the smell of burning beer and jelly spread. Already a swath of scorched earth was developing, sand and ashes marking the path they had traveled. Glorious! Zap! Bink dropped to the ground. A wiggle, striking with the luck of the mindless, had holed Herman's right hand. Good. Now Bink could get out of the net and really go to work, setting the most magnificent blaze in all salamander history. But the centaur looped about and grabbed the net with his left hand. The flames touched his fingers momentarily, and the tips shivered into ash, but he hung on with the stubs. Curse the courage of the hermit! "On!" Herman cried, resuming forward speed. "To the left!" Bink had to obey. Angrily, he shot forth an especially intense flame, hoping the hermit would drop him again, but it didn't work. The centaur galloped on, widening the circle a bit since the wiggle radius had evidently expanded further. It was useless to burn where the wiggles had been, or where they would be. The flame had to be where they were now. Any that zapped past the sheet of flame and paused in an already burned spot would survive. That made it a tricky calculation, but it was their only chance. The circle was almost complete. The centaur could really move. They raced up to the broadening swath of their starting point, pausing to let a few trapped monsters get out before being doomed. The last to go was the great land serpent, 100 feet of slithering torso. Trent was there, organizing the remaining animals into a cleanup detail to intercept any few wiggles already outside the circle of fire. Now that the great majority of wiggles were being eliminated, it was feasible to go after those few individually. Every last one had to be squished. The fire closed in on the original wiggle hive. There was a deafening groan. "Ow! Something stirred invisibly. "Bigfoot!" Trent exclaimed. "He's still alive in there!" "I thought he was dead," Herman said, horrified. "We've already closed the circle. We can't let him out." "He was riddled through the legs, so he fell, but he wasn't dead," Trent said. "The fall must have knocked him out for a while." He stared into the leaping flames, now outlining the form of a gargantuan man, lying prone, stirring at the peripheries. The odor was of roasting garbage. Too late now. The doomed giant crashed about. Flaming branches flew wide. Some landed in the jungle beyond the circle. "Catch those flames!" the centaur cried. "They can start a forest fire." But no one could quench or move or even contain the flames. No one except Herman himself with his weed net. He dumped Bink out and galloped toward the nearest, which was dangerously close to an oil barrel tree. Trent gestured hastily, and Bink was his human self again. He leaped out of the smoldering ground where his salamander self had touched. What power the evil magician had! He could destroy Xanth at any time just by making a dozen salamanders. Bink blinked. and saw Chameleon chasing a wiggle between the prongs of magic fire formed by thrown brands. She was too intent or stupid to realize the danger. He ran after her. "Chameleon, turn back!" She paid no heed, faithful to her chore. He caught up and spun her about. "The fire's getting the wiggles. We have to get out of here." "Oh," she said faintly. Her once fancy dress was ragged, and dirt smudged her face, but she was excruciatingly lovely. "Come on." He took her by the hand and drew her along. But a determined tongue of fire had crossed behind them. They were trapped in a closing island. The omen. Now at last it struck, at both Chameleon and him. Herman leaped over the tongue, a splendid figure of a centaur. "Up on my back," he cried. Bink wrapped his arms about Chameleon and heaved her up onto the hermit's back. She was wondrously supple, slender of waist and expansive of thigh. Not that he had any business noticing such things at the moment, but his position behind her as she slid on her belly onto the centaur made the thoughts inevitable. He gave her graceful posterior one last ungraceful shove, getting her balanced, then scrambled up himself. Herman started walking, then running, ready to hurdle the fire with his double burden. Zap! A wiggle close by. The centaur staggered. "I'm hit!" he cried. Then he righted himself, made a convulsion of effort, and leaped. He fell short. His front legs buckled, and the rear ones were in flame. Bink and Chameleon were thrown forward, landing on either side of the human torso. Herman grabbed each by an arm, and with a surge of centaur strength, shoved both on beyond the danger zone. Trent charged up. "Hermit, you're burning!" he cried. "I will transform you!" "No," Herman said. "I am holed through the liver. I am done for. Let the clean fire take me." He grimaced. "Only, to abate the agony quickly, your sword, sir." And he pointed at his neck. Bink would have temporized, pretending misunderstanding, trying to delay the inevitable. The evil magician was more decisive. "As you require," Trent said. Suddenly his blade was in his hand, flashing in an arc, and the centaur's noble head flew off the body, to land upright on the ground just beyond the flame. Bink stared aghast. He had never before witnessed such a cold-blooded killing. "I thank you," the head said. "You abated the agony most efficiently. Your secret dies with me." The centaur's eyes closed. Herman the Hermit had really wanted it that way. Trent had judged correctly and acted instantly. Bink himself would have bungled it. "There was a creature I would have been proud to have taken for a friend," Trent said sadly. "I would have saved him had it been within my power." Little lights danced in close, centering on that dead head. At first Bink supposed they were sparks, but they did not actually burn. "The will-o'-the-wisps," Trent murmured, paying their last respects. The lights dispersed, taking with them their vague impression of wonders barely glimpsed and joys never quite experienced. The fire consumed the body, then the head, and swept on into an already burned area. Most of the remaining flame was now in the center of the circle, where the invisible giant no longer thrashed. Trent raised his voice. "All creatures silent in respect for Herman the Hermit, wronged by his own kind, who has died in defense of Xanth, and for Bigfoot and all the other noble creatures who perished similarly." A hush fell on the throng. The silence became utter. Not even an insect hummed. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3. No sound. It was a fantastic assemblage of monsters pausing with bowed heads in deference to the ones who had labored so valiantly against the common enemy. Bink was profoundly moved. Never again would he think of the creatures of the magic wild as mere animals. At last, Trent lifted his eyes again. "Xanth is saved, thanks to Herman. And to you all," he announced. "The Wiggles are exterminated. Disperse with our gratitude and go with pride. There is no more important service you could have performed, and I salute you." "But some Wiggles may have escaped," Bink protested in a whisper. "No, none escaped. The job was well done." "How can you be so sure?" "I heard no zaps during the silence. No Wiggle sits still longer than 3 minutes." Bink's mouth dropped open. The silence of respected mourning, sincere as it had been, had also been the verification of the menace that had indeed been abated. Bink would never have thought of that himself. How competently Trent had assumed the difficult and demanding chore of leadership when the centaur died, and without betraying his secret. The assorted monsters dispersed peaceably, operating under the tacit truce of this effort. Many were wounded, but they bore their pain with the same dignity and courage Herman had, and did not snap at one another. The great land serpent slithered by, and Bink counted 6 holes along its length, but it did not pause. The serpent, like the others, had come to do what had to be done, but it would be as dangerous as ever in future encounters. "Shall we resume our journey?" Trent inquired, glancing for the last time across the flat, bare disk of ashes. "We'd better," Bink said. "I think the fire is dying out now." Abruptly, he was the Sphinx again, half as tall as the invisible giant, and far more impressive. Apparently, Trent had decided multiple transformations were safe. Trent and Chameleon boarded, and he retraced the path to their cache of supplies. "And no more comfort breaks," Bink muttered in a boom. Someone chuckled. End of Chapter 14.